All right, you are in store for a special treat today on this week's episode. We're talking about banter, a little bit about flirting, a little bit about how to make sure they know you're interested, how to kind of tell if maybe they are interested. You know, we've done the first date thing. Maybe we're going on a new first date. We want to make sure that, we can have a fun, flirty, playful conversation. So we're going to dive deep into this topic today. So hopefully it's going to up your banter game. You're going to be flirting all over the place, shooing people off with a stick. So on that fabulous note, let's get started talking about banter.
Fantastic. I love this topic. And before we even get into the words that come out of our mouth, we need to talk about communication, because a large part of communication comes from body language. And so before you can go and have a successful banter conversation, or you can successfully flirt, you should probably be paying attention to body language and the signals that you're putting out and the signals that the other person is putting out. So I guess the very first thing that people see is your beautiful face. And what's important is eye contact. So let's just start at the top and kind of work down, talk about eye contact for a minute. And there is an 80-20 rule when it comes to eye contact. You want to look at somebody in the eyes about 80% of the time. But if you do it more than that, it feels really creepy.
There is that fine line between being, oh, I'm like looking in your face, like, oh, I'm going to stare into your soul and see if I can. Right. We want to make sure that we're looking at them so that they know we're talking, we see them, all that good stuff, but without being like that one person, like, she didn't blink.
A good rule of thumb that if you're unfamiliar and nervous and having a hard time with how much eye contact is too much, you can look at somebody in the eyes when they're speaking to you and maybe look away a little bit or look around a little bit when you're giving an answer, but make sure that you're looking at them when they're talking to you, because that shows them that they are or that you are interested in them.
I think it was on The Office. Don't quote me on this, but Dwight, you don't necessarily have to look him in the eye. You can look right between the eyes. It's an old salesman's trick. So for my Office fans out there, so maybe feeling like looking them directly in the eye feels too much, but maybe finding that spot kind of on their forehead or focusing on their nose. Because we all have those moments where it just feels like we're building up that confidence. We're working towards making more consistent eye contact. So finding maybe some of those tips and tricks, little cheat codes, so that it feels like you're still kind of giving them that, but without maybe making you too uncomfortable that you're feeling like making direct eye contact with somebody.
Yes, that. I like the trick of looking between their eyes. I also like to, when I'm working with clients, like to encourage them to use eye contact more in general when they're just out in public. So your server, stop what you're doing, stop the bite that you're in the middle of taking when she comes over to check on you, and connect with her via eye contact when they're at your table. Or when you're at the grocery store line and you're checking out, eye contact with the clerk that's checking you out so that you can practice, because that eye contact definitely shows confidence and it shows interest.
Yeah, there was, you would challenge me to this when I was trying to get better at making small talk with people, is that I would randomly compliment somebody in the store or have a random conversation. That's another way to start practicing it. Like when I saw a woman who had a cute pair of shoes on, looking them in the face when you say, hey, love your shoes. So finding all of those little mini moments that you can start 2 seconds here, 2 seconds there. It's that muscle. Remember, you don't walk into the gym fully hulked out. You have to work on building those muscles. Again, this is just a skill that we're learning to build so that we get more and more comfortable and confident deploying that particular skill whenever we're out meeting and talking to new people.
Right. Absolutely. Body language tip number 2, smile. You've got muscles in your mouth, you use them for a smile. And that also give somebody the encouragement to continue to converse with you or to continue to share with you. It makes you look friendly and approachable, which is definitely something you want whether you're going out on a second or third date with somebody, a first date with somebody, whether you've been dating somebody for a long time, or whether you are looking to take your dating offline and meet somebody in person, your smile is like your business card. So it's definitely important.
And this is also like, you smile when you want to smile. This is not when men walk by and say, hey, you should smile more. Give them the finger and keep giving your RBF. You don't have to smile when you've been told to smile if you do not want to. But like you said, if you're on a date, you're enjoying yourself, you're having fun, the easiest way to communicate that to the person across from you is to smile. Yeah, doesn't necessarily have to be full teeth, but smile.
Right. And I had a friend and he was uncomfortable smiling, very uncomfortable smiling. And he would practice in front of the mirror. And so for guys, girls, for anybody out there, smiling is something that is kind of new for you, something unfamiliar. I know that that is the case for somebody. Practice in front of the mirror, look at yourself and smile and practice trying to make it reach your eyes. They always say that you can hear when somebody is smiling on the other end of the phone. That is something that you can practice and that can be a learned skill. And for the severely smile compromised, I will say I also had a friend in this case, and he actually used to use a pen or a pencil and bite on that to practice even using those muscles, because he hadn't developed those muscles because he didn't smile and had to teach himself how to do that with a pen or a pencil. So there are always ways to get better at smiling and to practice it. So again, walking into the gym, you're not always going to be hulked up on day one. It's a muscle that you have to practice. And so that's also a muscle that you can practice to get more comfortable with. And when you're out in public, you can practice, again, smiling at strangers. It makes somebody's day better. It'll definitely make somebody's day better.
Yes, that's a good thing. When I'm like walking the trails, I'm out doing like anything out there, like, hi, a good morning as you're passing people on the sidewalk or in the mall or wherever you are, goes a long way. Or even to like the people inside a store, because very rarely do they get people who are happy to see them. They're usually dealing with everybody who's upset. So practicing, saying hi, being polite and kind to like just people out and about in your day, again, building that muscle so that it's almost second nature when you're out on a date.
Yes. And notice what in your life makes you smile naturally. I am not a hang out with large groups of children type of person. I don't function well in that environment, but kids in general make me smile. When I notice them bending their will to get what they want, some people think that that's a bad thing, but I just look at the pure innocence of it and how they are creating the environment in which they want. And that makes me smile. So I know that's one way that I practice and pay attention. How does it feel when I'm smiling at small children? How does it feel when something makes me smile in my everyday life? And then I can capture that and I can go back to that. And when I'm practicing on my own, I can think back to that feeling, and that will bring that smile back up so that I know what it looks like when I'm looking in the mirror and can practice that way.
I like dumb animal videos, and there's one that I'm thinking of it right now, and it's been years that I have it, where it's this video of this other penguin slapping another penguin down. Makes me laugh every single time. But starting like a file, whether that's on your like Instagram or your TikTok, or even just on your phone, of like those short little snippets, short little videos, memes, whatever they are, that kind of boost your mood, boost your spirit, then when you're having that moment, popping up one of those videos and kind of that instant mood booster, so that, yeah, it's that much easier to walk into that space wherever you're going and having a great big smile on your face.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great tip. So moving on from smiling, if you have any questions, comments, you can always drop us a line. We can kind of go into that more or give some more tips on that. But dropping down to the next one, I would say, let's talk for a minute about nervous gestures, because we have tells, and there are some that you can look for in other people that will really help tell you how they're feeling on a date. And nervousness isn't a bad thing, but it can help you get a gauge or put you in a position where you have the, I don't want to say control because that's a bad word, but you have the control, or you have the power to help somebody else feel at ease and make the date more comfortable if you are on a date with somebody. So some of those nervous gestures, whether you are male or female, if you find somebody rubbing their palms, that is a nervous gesture, maybe rubbing on their arms. Sometimes closed body language can be a sign of nervousness. Sometimes it can be a sign that somebody's not having a good time on a date, but sometimes it can be a sign of nervousness. A couple of others might be if somebody is rubbing the back of their neck, that's also a nervous gesture, or even rubbing underneath their chin, something like that can also indicate some nerves. So as you're smiling, as you're being open, as you are making that eye contact, pay attention to how that's being received on the other end. And are you putting somebody at ease, or are you making them nervous? And is there something that you can do or even talk about to kind of ease some of that tension?
I just had the urge to do every single one of those as you went over them. Like, don't touch your neck, don't touch your neck. So I'm just like, I think everything's like, yeah, I'm just gonna fidget here. I was like, I never know what to do with my hands. So I'm probably one who's gonna like rub my hands together or play with my fingernails, or just kind of even play with my hair. I know that can be kind of either or, whether you're like preening, or sometimes it's a nervous habit to kind of make sure my hair is where it's supposed to be. But it's all of those things that you don't really think about until all of a sudden you're in this situation. Like, did I just touch my eyebrow for the 15th time in like 2 seconds here? So it's, again, one of those things that it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but again, awareness can always bring you about maybe a way to deal with that nervousness. Maybe another way to be like, okay, take a deep breath. Maybe it's time to excuse yourself to run to the restroom, give yourself a break if you need to, if you've noticed that like your nervous tics have started to take over more of the conversation than you wanted to, or more of your attention than you wanted to.
And the other thing that I find interesting about noting whether or not the other party is nervous is that, for better or worse, for whatever it takes, you guys can judge me for it, whatever, but if somebody else is as nervous as I know that I am, it makes me feel better and less nervous.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
So something else, again, when you're taking note of that body language, if you're noticing that somebody else is like that, it can help take the edge off of your nerves. And in return, it's cyclical. So once you relax a little bit and become less nervous, a lot of times the other person will relax and become less nervous as well. So the first one that kind of can start calming things down and bringing things back to a stable environment where everybody is comfortable, that's a benefit for everybody.
And sometimes I don't do this necessarily all the time, but I have in the past say, are you as nervous about this as I am? So sometimes like naming this elephant that's been sitting at this table with us and saying, oh yeah, by the way, I'm kind of nervous about this. Sometimes that can be enough to diffuse the situation. We're like, okay, they're nervous too. So now, now that we, recognize that we're both nervous, now we can get back on to talking about the things that we really wanted to talk about. Like, what do you do for fun?
I'm so glad that you brought that up. We're still going to talk about body language a little bit more, but that is a great flirtatious banter right there to name the elephant in the room when you're doing that. And you can do it the way that you did it, or you can walk in and go, wow, I'm so glad I'm not nervous at all. and make a joke out of it.
But this still really does kind of connect to like the whole body language aspect, because there is definitely a way that you can say, I'm nervous, and your face looks like you're not joking and you look like you're not joking. And then there's that way where you have that little bit of a laugh, you're smiling, you maybe have that gentle flirtatious touch where you can kind of hopefully emote and come across that, yes, this is just kind of joking. I'm trying to diffuse the tension. So again, it's part of that whole body language. So how you actually say, oh, are you as nervous as I am, can definitely sway the conversation, I think, one way or the other. Because if you're trying to come off straight faced and they don't know that, I think that sometimes is a recipe for somebody to feel bad because they're reading your body language. They're reading, oh, she must be really serious. And they may take you seriously when they don't know that this is just you being silly and a smart aleck. So again, taking into that account that body language aspect when you're bantering here.
Right, absolutely. And a lot of that starts with the facial expressions, but there are other things that we can do. And one of the ways is how we're positioning ourselves when we're talking to somebody. Are you sitting across from somebody, face to face, toe to toe, standing in front of somebody directly? That can feel almost aggressive if you're nervous. If you're nervous, if the other person is nervous. So if you're in a position where you're having drinks and you're standing or you're doing something else where you would be face to face, take just a little bit of a step to the side and leave room. Like if you were standing in front of somebody and talking, you wanted to open up the circle to make room for a third person. That's what you would do. Just taking that little step over to the side kind of opens that up and deflates that aggressive posture and becomes more of an assertive posture, which is very helpful in showing people that you are approachable as well, that you are having a good time, that you are friendly, which makes some of that bantering and that joking a little bit easier to take because they feel more comfortable with that extra space.
So, and kind of like in respect to that too, like if you're sitting side by side, it's like, whether are you turning your knees towards each other? Or are you kind of turning your knees away? So there are all of these little things that maybe subconsciously are just happening and you're not thinking too much about it. But again, you're like, hey, am I having fun? Do I want to indicate that? Then I'm going to lean towards them a little bit more. I'm going to kind of come towards their direction, maybe lean in just a little bit. So without having to like come out right out and say, hey, I'm like you, we're having a good time, right? How can my body language maybe start to show that as I'm getting to know this person?
Yes, exactly. And kind of moving on from that, and the last one that we'll talk about for body language before we move on to the next topic is touching. When you're out on first date, second date, when you're early in a relationship, touching can be a big indicator. And so there is appropriate touching and inappropriate touching. And then there is I just want to be friends touching or not touching, and the I'm interested and kind of ready to move forward type of touching. And so the first thing I would say is touching on the hand or the arm. If they reach out and they touch you and you're on a date, it's probably a good sign that you're interested in them, they're interested in you, and that things are going well from the other person's perspective. When you're female on the date, and guys are paying attention to this, the higher up on the arm that you touch is a subconscious message as to where you're anticipating. Typically from the elbow down is more of a friendly touch, probably appropriate for a first date. When you kind of get above the elbow, it is showing a little bit more of that romantic interest. Some people are touchy-feely. Some people just do that because that's who they are. But in general, that's kind of a good rule of thumb to think about or keep in the back of your mind.
Yes, I know that's something that I've definitely used in the past to kind of indicate where I'm like, yeah, I'm enjoying this. So maybe it is just like a pat on the arm, or sometimes, as you're moving up towards the bar, like a hand on the small of your back or something like that. So it's finding those little moments where you're like, yeah, it doesn't have to be overt and aggressive, but there can be a natural flow in the conversation where you're like, oh, that's the funniest thing. And you hold on to their arm or whatever, however that kind of works its way into the conversation. But again, if that's not your cup of tea, then that would be the opportunity to say, hey, because this is a first date, I really don't, I'm not a touchy-feely kind of person. So I'm not really comfortable with that on a first date. I'm happy to talk about it if we date further down the line. So again, knowing what your boundaries and what is in your your go list is, again, that's why we want you to take time to figure out what do you want, what you don't want, is so that when you're in these situations, you're not trying to figure out, is this something I want or don't want? Going into the date, you're like, this is not what I do on a first date. And then you can be confident to kind of explain and tell your date, like, no, that's just not something I do quite yet.
Right. And I think that's actually a good point, and probably something that we should talk about in a future week is how to really address the no's on a first date, because we all have landmines. They have landmines. You're going to have landmines, and you can't help but step on them. And sometimes that happens during a first date. Not often, right? Because it's usually pretty casual or whatever, but sometimes it does happen during a first date. And what do you do and how do you react when somebody steps on a landmine? Is somebody a touchy-feely person and you're not, and they're touching inappropriately, but you're still having fun on a date? So I think that we should, table that and talk about that in a future episode. But I think that's an important thing to do. But now we get to the really fun part, and we kind of get to talk about the formula for some bantering and keeping the conversation going when you're out on a date.
Yes. So you want to kind of explain, because you explain this better than I can. So there is a little bit of a formula to doing this, not necessarily that it has to be this way all the time, but if you're one of those people who really likes having like direction when it comes to being able to talk, being able to kind of put yourself out there, there is kind of this wonderful little formula type of way to like, okay, how can we start to drive this into maybe some more banter?
So one of the things to keep in mind is that you don't want it to be interview style. Sometimes via text, sometimes when you're starting a conversation, that's what it is. I ask a question, you answer it, you ask another question, they answer it and ask a question. And that's really not a great formula for a conversation. It can feel stiff, it can feel forced, it can feel unfun, and it can feel like an interrogation. Not even an interview, but it can feel like an interrogation. So one of the things is to ask a question, wait for the answer, and then talk about that answer, or dig a little bit deeper, or ask a meaningful question, or make a meaningful statement based on the answer that you received for that question. For example, I could ask you, what's the most boring thing about you? Right? That's a great question. It's unusual. It's a little bit different. It helps you understand why somebody is ordinary. Lisa, you were talking about that question. I love that question. So if somebody comes in and says, well, the most boring thing about me is that I watch TV at home on Friday nights, you can go into, oh, I love XYZ show. Maybe you're a Game of Thrones fan or something along those lines. Not sponsored, not a Game of Thrones fan personally, but maybe you are. And so you could talk about that, or you can ask them what's their favorite show. And it leads into another question where you can maybe talk about entertainment, and you can talk about what you like to watch and what you have in common there. Or going even further, it's okay, so tell me what's your favorite sport. And they might tell you that they're not into sports, and you might be really into sports. Again, that's going to give you some common ground. But if they come back and they say that their favorite sport is hockey, that gives you something to talk about, and you can ask meaningful questions in there and keep that conversation going rather than just moving on to your next question.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that gives you a nice insight into that other person, because hopefully you've tapped into something that is a passion for them, and nothing like lights somebody up than when they get to talk about something that they love, that they're passionate about, that they really want somebody else to fully understand just how awesome this show, this sport, this book, this whatever it is to them. And so that can be a great way to kind of see the like other side to somebody else, to kind of let them get really excited about something, and to see what happens when they get really excited.
Yes. So that is one way to start the banter and kind of keep that going. And the other way is to make a joke, but do it in a positive way. We're not talking self-deprecation here. We're not saying that you should say anything bad about yourself or anything negative about the person that you're with. But let's say that you're we were kind of talking about that a little bit earlier when we were saying, oh, it's a good thing I'm not nervous at all. Kind of making a joke about that and turning something negative, the fact that you're really nervous, into something positive, and making that a positive characteristic about yourself, even if it is outlandish, even if it is something there. Making a joke like that really brings positive stuff to the conversation, and it also gives you guys something to laugh about, joke about, and maybe find some common ground to continue a conversation.
Yes. And the other example that we had kind of, if you're on having drinks with somebody and maybe you have briefly both mentioned like wanting to expand into dinner, and you're like, no, that was not my stomach growling. We're not at all hungry, not ready to go to dinner yet. So there are plenty of ways to just kind of, as a natural part of wherever you are in the conversation, finding those ways to kind of make a joke out of something, kind of lighten the mood a little bit. Maybe you've been hitting some heavy topics for whatever reason. It's your first date, you talk about what you want, but that can be a way to kind of like, okay, let's maybe switch the scenery here, kind of lighten the mood, kind of see how the other person reacts to jokes. I think that's always telling information too.
Yes, and come in prepared with some of those things. Come in prepared to say, hey, you know what? I really enjoy doing X, Y, and Z. So I really enjoy hiking. Do you hike? That is a great way to start the conversation and keep a conversation going too, because not only are you asking them, but you're also giving something away. You're telling them something about yourself, and you're earning the right to the answer to the question that you've asked. You're earning your right to that answer from the other person, because that person knows your answer and doesn't have to ask the question back.
Yes. I mean, it can be simply, when you say hiking, you're like, hey, I just went on the Appalachian Trail or something like that. Or, hey, have you hiked out at this particular national park? So again, finding those ways that not necessarily like a humble brag really, but it's okay. Not everybody's going to know to ask you this question about hiking, but it's a way to start to volunteer information about yourself without always having to wait for, are they going to ask me about this? Should I wait until I'm asked about this? No, give them a chance to get to know you by volunteering information about yourself.
Right. And it could be stuff that you haven't done. It's, we were talking about, I like hiking, I like sports. We're talking about the things that we like, but you can do that same thing with goals in your life. Hey, it's a goal of mine to visit all of the national parks. Do you like to go out? Do you like to travel? That type of thing can come in there too. So it can be goals that you have, not necessarily what you have done or what you do like. And you can see if you have any common goals for the future that you can find some commonalities for too.
Yes. Again, this is all just about ways to make you better at conversation, quite frankly. While, yes, we're talking about this in the aspect of a date, but this is really stuff that you can use if you're out networking for business, if you're at a cocktail party, if you're at a wedding. So these are all skills that, while, yes, we are focused on dating at the moment, these are transferable to like any relationship you could possibly have in your life, so that you kind of help people feel at ease and feel comfortable and start to build that like know, like, and trust with people, and start to build those relationships and friendships.
So your assignment for this next week is to go out and to practice some of these conversation skills with random people, whether it's at a restaurant with your server, whether it is when you're in the grocery store with the person standing in line or the checkout person across from you, wherever that happens to be. Practice some of those skills and let us know about your experience. Drop us a line, let us know how it goes, or let us know how, if there's something that you encountered that you have questions on, that maybe we can speak to or talk to or help you find an answer to.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So what went well? What didn't go well? Do you need further explanation on how to really make this work? So we'll put the email address in the show notes. So be sure to email us if you have any questions about Banter, or if you just have any questions in general. We want to be able to make sure that our episodes are answering the questions that you guys actually have. So always feel free to drop us an email with any potential dating, relationship, love questions that you might have, so that we can answer them for you and make sure that we're giving you all the good stuff that you need.
So with that, drop us a line and we will see you next week.
Bye.